sounding kid. I mean, it's like listening to Dora the Explorer. You know, she just has a very cute sound to her, no matter what she's talking about. And now she's talking about some pretty frightening things. The question is, Katie Smith, is she repeating things she heard on the news? Is she repeating things that maybe somebody else said, or things she really saw or experienced? Come on.
It's so hard to tell with a kid that age, right? Even witnesses who are adults, they get so impressed by other information that they hear from other sources that your honest memory is not even sure where you can source things from your firsthand experience or for things that you later learned. We know that with witness identification all the time, so it's really tough to tell with a young child.
So the big question is, what does the jury do with this testimony? They heard both from Millie as a 7-year-old live on the stand, and they hear from her in this interview, really more contemporaneous with what happened. But it's a kid, and the things we just talked about, do they discount it? Do they ignore it? What do they do with it?
I mean, traditional wisdom says that the statements that are made more close in time to the event are more reliable, right? And as time goes on and there's more information that you hear from other sources, then your testimony becomes more biased. So, but again, that's just traditional wisdom. The jury can technically do whatever they want with this. They can credit whichever testimony they like.
And I think they had learned prior to this recorded testimony that Millie also allegedly suffered some abuse at the hands of the defendants, the Rosenbaums in this case. So I'm sure they're layering that whole analysis, thinking, here's this girl who sounds so cute and so fun and happy. Doesn't sound like an abused child at all, not reclusive and quiet. You know, it's a tough job for the jury to kind of sort through all of these various signs and signals, right?
No, you're very right about that, especially because the theory is, of course, that they were abusing both of the children and that she did have bruises and signs of abuse. So to match that with this precocious kid that you're hearing on the stand is sometimes hard to understand. But as we know, the abuse doesn't always look the same in every person. And sometimes children, while deeply affected by abuse, are not consciously cognizant that it's inappropriate conduct. So it sounds like they've had a really hard life, and it's hard to judge.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention and get your take on this when we come back after a counselor's testimony here is the foster program. You know, we seem to analyze this case almost as if they're natural parents, and they had the kids for 4 months, and I think there's a whole lot to talk about in that context. So let's take a listen now to some of the testimony from one of the counselors in this case. This was one of Millie's counselors in some earlier testimony. They're one of the counselors involved with the kids, Millie's counselor specifically, talking about, you know, the difficult time this child was having, not just from this incident, but you know, as a foster child in general. Katie Smith is here. Let me follow up with what I started to talk about before that testimony. The foster program, you know, I don't mean to denigrate the program. I know some folks are doing some amazing work to be foster parents. But I have to wonder, and we've not heard any testimony about this, what was the plan or motivation for the Rosenbaums in this case? Were they motivated by the money you get as a foster parent from the government? Were they really looking to adopt these kids? And how important would that be to know?
I think it's important to know, obviously, what their motivations are. But the weird thing about motivations is sometimes people are motivated from a good place. Like sometimes they think that they want to do well, but they can't, through their own self-control or their own improper parenting models, parent properly. And I do believe that I've read some information that this family was relatively well connected and well thought of. So on paper, they would seem to be a good choice, right? So you can't fetter out all of these things, but the injuries that went unnoticed is really problematic.
Yeah, and there was some evidence that even the process to get the children placed with the Rosenbaums was a little bit short-circuited because she knew certain people and maybe didn't have to go through the same vetting process. So great that she was connected to do what she wanted to do. Maybe not so great if it meant she skipped a couple of steps along the way. So we will find out as this whole thing plays out. By the way, Katie, I should mention, I was doing my research on you, and I noticed you've been identified by your colleagues as a rising star in the legal community.
Thank you.
So congratulations on that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Of course, I can relate to that. My California colleagues identified me as a black hole. So not quite the same, but anyway. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, coming back with more in two cases. Georgia for Rosenbaum, and in Florida for the new case, Grant Amato. Stay where you are. We'll be right back. Dr. Guerras, very strong witness yesterday for the prosecution and did pretty well on cross-exam as well. Katie Smith, what do you think about her demeanor? And obviously, it's not a fun job. You know, this is, you know, autopsies of little kids. I mean, it doesn't get much worse. But how do you like her?
I think she seems really reliable. She seems very credible. I like the way she broke things down succinctly, because sometimes you get people up there who just, flood you with all sorts of medical jargon, and she did a really great job. I think that her testimony is completely credible.
And she's gotten to at least one of the key points for the defense in this case, which is that those injuries that were found on the examination were the result of bad CPR or bad Heimlich maneuver. But she details bruising from the head to the waist, almost without stopping, just one big bruise. That makes it sound a little odd if you think, how bad would you have to be at doing CPR or giving the Heimlich to cause those kinds of injuries?
I mean, and what really got me to was the laceration to the liver, and that the pancreas was separated in two. I mean, that's a lot of force. I mean, as a layperson, I hear that and I think that's an extraordinary amount of force. That's not just botched CPR. It doesn't make sense.
And she's suggesting it could have been a punch, it could have been a kick. It was some blunt force trauma. And that little girl, suffered through it. And then, as we hear this witness, and let's listen to more of her testimony now, because it took me to the key question I asked yesterday, which was, where's the chicken? That's the defense argument, that this child choked on a chunk of chicken. Well, where's the chicken? Let's see if the ME could find it. Very matter of fact is the ME here, the doctor, and she's talking about where these bruises are found. Katie Smith, she's talking about finding bruises in the pubic area. And I mean, in what form of CPR or resuscitation efforts are you going to have bruising in that area? It makes no sense, and it's frightening.
It's very disturbing. I mean, the first thing I think when I hear this is how was this unnoticed? Because it obviously was going on for quite some time. It was covering such a significant portion of her body that if anyone would have examined her, they would have noticed. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And
that gets us to this odd scenario with the defendants. We have Jennifer, the foster mom. We have Joseph, the foster dad. One attorney representing them both, and all the evidence we're hearing is Jennifer, 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 Jennifer. And in fact, there was a motion for directed verdict as to Joseph yesterday. What's your take on the problems this attorney may have set up for herself by doing this dual representation with apparent conflict?
Yeah, I'm surprised that that was allowed to go forward. I mean, parties usually can waive conflict, but I wouldn't want to represent two parties like that. That's too messy, especially because a lot of times the parties blame each other to get a good deal, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to think that the husband knew his wife was doing this. I mean, how could you not know? Any minuscule interaction with the child would make you realize that this child was being abused.
And there is some evidence that he was present during some of the abuse, again, the alleged abuse the witnesses have talked about, and apparently did nothing. And so, his crimes are maybe crimes of omission, that he didn't stop things, that he didn't do something sooner, that he didn't prevent further injury, that he didn't prevent the death because he knew what was going on. That's certainly the prosecution's point here.
I mean, this reminds me of the child abuse case where we saw the guy in Florida who his daughter supposedly, his adopted daughter was choking on milk. This idea that if you can render care and you don't, and someone dies because you do not step in and you owe some duty of care to this child, then you're liable. And so that seems to fit with the defendant here.
Exactly, and of course we know in that case it was a guilty verdict against the father, the adopted father in that case. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We're coming back again, the Rosenbaum jury on lunch, as is the Amato jury in our new case out of Florida. So stay right where you are. We will be back. This is the Law and Crime Network. There is prosecutor Chuck Boring getting right to the point. What caused the death of Layla? Was it some sort of bad resuscitation effort or what? And this ME, Katie Smith, is very clear in saying, no, these aren't the kinds of injuries you see with any sort of resuscitation efforts, and I couldn't find the chicken. So how strong a witness for this prosecution?
Very strong. In fact, that might be all you would need.
We had some discussion about where this witness appeared in the trial. She ended up being the very last prosecution witness. Some would suggest, well, maybe she should have been there to lay the foundation. But now, in retrospect, what do you think in terms of how she took what this jury has heard in terms of raw witness testimony, lay witness testimony, and tied it all together with the science?
I think it's really smart. Sometimes, there's some science to the idea of calling a really strong witness last, because if you call them first, it gets kind of diluted along the way.
And it can be confusing. People they have no base of reference for some of the terms that are being used or some of the facts being discussed.
Especially a medical witness, you want to get all the facts out there and then have them tie it up at the end. I mean, also too, if you call your strongest witness first, the other side has a lot more time to pick it apart and to piece it out, and so you kind of just give that sucker punch at the end, and it's really strong. And I think that that's what they did here. And that's the last thing that the jury hears before they go to deliberate.
That's true. Not so fast, because we have the cross-examination. And this is, of course, one of my favorite defense attorneys, Katherine Mull. She is the bulldog in the courtroom. Let's see how she did on cross-examination to attack this witness and her opinions, the ME's opinions, that these injuries could never have been caused by anything but abuse. Let's go to the courtroom. Not a bad point being made there by the defense in this case, Katie Smith, saying, hey, you didn't take pictures of this allegedly clean airway, and that's how it's been described. Where's the chicken? There was nothing in there according to this ME, but you didn't take pictures of that. There's no way for me, defense attorney, to evaluate what was done because I just have your word.
I think that was the only hit that I really saw in that. I mean, there were some good tries, but it's a fair point. It would be nice to have those photographs, but it's hard sometimes to prove a negative. I mean, I think that customary practice would show that if there's nothing there, it's not routine for the doctor to document the nothing. So I think that that's where the prosecution would have to go to counter the defense's theory.
And the witness did a great job, I think, in fending off some of these questions. We did find out where the chicken was. It was in the sink. I don't know if that gets the defense any closer to where they need to be to prove that it was a choking hazard in light of this witness's testimony, though. But it's at least somewhat explained. Helpful?
I think the chicken is a red herring.
Oh, let me make a note of that.
Good one, right?
It's a good one.
It's a red chicken.
Okay.
Now, I mean, no, it is a red herring. I mean, they're trying to draw all this attention to this sideshow of the chicken, when in reality, even if she was choking, the injuries aren't consistent with the Heimlich, and she didn't die of asphyxiation, so...
Yep. I get that. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. The red herring. We're going to come back to the Law and Crime Network. We are in Georgia. We are in Florida. 2 cases live. Join us. We'll be right back.